Hey folks, I'm going to take you on a recent trip that I took. Basically the theme for today is picking your times to go fishing. The night before this we had a really big cold front roll through, and prior to that it had been steadily warm. These fish had been up spawning, and a lot of them are already done and were working their way out. And it was 27 degrees in the morning and the water was looking good, and I try to get out every chance that I get, but I decided to focus on the evening because the temperature was supposed to really pick up that day. It's supposed to get up in the high 60s. So I got my work done, had 2 hours left of daylight. Also, working in my favor, we had a storm front rolling in that night. A lot of my trips this year have been based on storm fronts rolling in the next day for a couple reasons. One, it's always nice to fish for muskies right before front rolls in. It really seems to get them fired up. And two, that's really been the only chances I've had to fish, because by the time the water gets down to a fishable level, you have 1 day to fish before the next monsoon hits and trashes the creek again. So that was the situation that I had. So I go out and I fish this stretch with 2 hours left. I'm basically speed fishing. I'm burning my baits in. Even though the water was chilled from the morning, I figured it had picked up a little bit and the bait was up moving around. Oh, there's old half-tail. Well, we didn't get the camera on until right after she ate. I was actually getting ready to turn it on the next cast, but she decided to come one cast too soon. This is the second fish on the new prototype game Over Jig from Beauzooka Baits. This time, this one came unglued when I was burning it in. There we go, hooks out. Alrighty. Oh yeah. Fat one. And unfortunately the length's gonna be a little off because she's missing most of her tail. If you check that out, crazy. Had she had all of her tail, she might have been a solid 37 1/4, 37 1/2. Unfortunately, I didn't get the cast and the hook set from that fish on video. I was in a stretch that I don't normally see a lot of fish. I had seen this fish 2 times prior to this trip, but I thought she was just in a spawning position and was moving her way out after the last high water event. I was literally about to turn the camera on at the next cast, so I got her in the middle of the fight. Got it. All right, number 2 on the game over jig today. This one looks like he might have a chance at 30. So we'll lay the bump out. All right, number 2 on the day for the Beauzooka game over jig. There you go, buddy. Keep in mind, all of this is happening in 2 hours of daylight. So, especially in the spring and in the winter, I've seen major feeding windows. Depending on the weather conditions, I mean, you could have a day where they're on all day long. Those are those rare days that you don't come across that often, and it's really what brings you back musky fishing, because it's awesome when it feels like you're bass fishing while you're musky fishing, because there's just muskies everywhere. This probably wouldn't have been one of those days given the conditions, but it seemed like I hit a major feeding window right before this front came in. That was also a big factor in these fish coming up to feed. Plus, they were coming off the spawn, so it's just a recipe for these fish to have the feed bag on. All right, before we go any further into this segment, I was going to give you a little tackle tip here, a little product review. This is actually a new bait that one of our fine sponsors, Beauzooka Baits, Bo Whittington, has just come up with. And when I first started talking with Bo and fishing his baits, I told him a lot about how I'm fond of these jigs. And Bo, he's been making a lot of glide baits, and he's been making a lot of hard-bodied baits for a long time. He's made some rubber baits too, and he has a little bit of experience working with resin. And we got to talking about the jigs, and I was always telling him, man, I'd really like to get a bigger jig that doesn't sink like a brick. I've had several large jigs that, I mean, you're getting the profile, but you're getting too much of a sink rate. And what I'm talking about with that is fishing these creeks especially, you're not fishing that deep of water. And what I've found with a jig, what makes it so effective for these fish is the flutter down. I've been using smaller bass jigs, probably in the 3/8 to 1/2 ounce size with an extra long skirt, and working it with a paddle tail in the back. And that paddle tail really offsets that 3/8 ounce jig especially. And it makes it flutter down, and it kind of hangs in place. And especially when the temperatures are cold, that hanging in place and fluttering, or a very slow fall, is when that fish eats most of the time. And I've found when trying bigger jigs, you get that really fast sink. I don't get as much activity on them. So I was talking with Bo, I said, man, I'd really like to get a jig that would just flutter down and have the huge profile. So he'd been playing with this idea for a while, and he finally worked up a prototype. And I mean, the first time we took it out, I caught a 39 in the creek on it, which is an excellent fish for in the creek. And since then, I've caught 6 fish on this prototype jig. It's not out there on the market yet, but we're still tweaking some things, and we're looking to probably get some out there in the fall of 2020 here. But what this jig is called, it's called the Game Over Jig, and it's a very oversized jig, and you can see it has a very large head on it. And what he's done with this head is, instead of it just being lead, he's actually created a resin head around it and then added weight to the neck with some soldering. And that's allowed it to balance it out but have the larger profile. It has an extra long skirt on it, and then rigged up a larger trailer hook. And this particular swim bait on the back is called a salt shaker, but he's also working with molding some of his own swim baits for these as well. But it's a super large profile for a jig. It has the profile without the sink, just like what I was talking about. And that's the bait that I'm using this entire trip. I've been really working at trying to figure out what makes these fish tick with this bait, and it seems like you can't fish it the wrong way. The first fish I caught on it was on a pull pause. Got it up to the boat and caught it in the figure 8. I've caught 2 fish on the figure 8 with this jig now, and the rest of them have been on the retrieve. And the retrieve fish, they ate it when I was burning it. So what I like about this is, I mean, you can look at it kind of like one of the Musky Innovation swimming dogs. It has a similar action to that, but you don't have 2 treble hooks dangling off the bottom, and there's just not as much body there. So your hookup ratio, even though you only have 2 single hooks, is going to be better because they're going to bite straight down on those hooks. They're not going to have to bite around a big hunk of rubber. Plus, with 2 single hooks instead of 2 treble hooks, you can work this thing through all kinds of cover. And that's what I like about jigs and spinner baits in some of these creeks that are real dingy in color, because you can't see all the cover down there. So you can let this thing sink down in that stuff and pull it out unscathed and get right in those fish's faces. And I've found that since I started fishing a jig for muskies, I've caught a lot more fish in the creek than I used to. And this larger profile, even outside of the spring, jig fishing's been a spring thing for me especially. I use it as a throwback bait all the time, but this is going to be a go-to bait from here on out. So look for them in the fall of 2020, the Beauzooka Baits Game Over Jig. Got it. Almost pulled a fast one on me there. All right, number 3 on the Game Over Jig for today. I always love it when they help me unhook them. Alright, here's number 3. Oh, this is a healthy one. Yep, they've all eaten on the retrieve so far. No figure 8 going on. Alrighty. There you go, buddy. See ya. On this next fish, notice the tree that I'm pitching to, and remember the tree from the last fish. This fish came 3 casts after I had just released the first one. They came no more than 5 yards away from this fish. So whenever these fish are coming off the spawn, they're going to be working their way back down the creeks, except your resident fish, because there are fish that hold in there all year round. Some of the bigger females, they might push back out to the river, but a lot of these are resident fish. And get it, this time of year, you have a lot of small bait that's starting to work up too. So if you find a pool and you cast in there and there's a lot of bait spraying everywhere and you find a muskie, don't move on to the next pool, because there's a reason that fish was there and you saw it whenever you threw your bait in there. All that bait went everywhere. Doesn't matter if they're only this big. Those muskies, they'll eat anything, especially coming off the spawn, that they can get in their mouth. So this one's just a testimony to that. 3 casts later, almost in the same spot. Got it.
Get back in there. Oh man. Got 3 casts after we just released that one. Number 4 on the game Over Jig. Get up here. Nope, nope. You don't do that to me. Sorry. There we go. All right. Number 4. This one's about the same size as the last one. Nope. 32.5. There you go, buddy.
I ended up raising one more fish that day, and it was probably within 5 casts after releasing that last one that I caught. I just couldn't get it to commit on the jig. Came back with a topwater bait, had it wake on that topwater bait, but it just wouldn't commit either. And I was just running out of daylight. Had I had a little more daylight and been able to play with that fish some more, probably could have gotten it to eat. But I had to navigate some serious log jams going back to the truck, and I didn't want to be stuck doing that by myself after dark. So I headed out. Basically, just to recap what I'm looking at today, is any time that you can fish prior to a storm front rolling in the last 2-3 hours before that front rolls in, and even into the front if it's not too severe and dangerous, it can really up your chances of contacting fish. So keep an eye on your future forecast. Try to time them in the mornings or the evenings if you can, or even if it's in the middle of the day. If there's a front rolling in, it doesn't matter what the moon phase is, what the temperature is. Basically what I'm saying is weather trumps all. If you can fish a storm front, always fish a storm front.